Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, welcome. Turn your video on, Mr. Winfield and Mr. Buckley.
My video is on. Can you see it?
No, I cannot.
Okay. What about now?
Not yet.
Because I have it turned on, I'm seeing the picture of myself on the screen.
Yeah, I got Mr. Grayson's video.
Yeah.
Welcome, Mr. Grayson.
Hey,
We're trying to work out some technical difficulties presently. Mr. Buckley, are you there?
Yeah.
Can you turn on your video?
I mean, I have my video unchecked, and I see it on my screen, and I see Mr.
I don't have Mr.
Okay.
Okay. Because I don't have Mr. Winfield or Mr. Buckley's video. There, I got Mr. Buckley.
Okay. You still don't see me?
Still don't see you, Mr. Winfield.
I mean, I'm on it on my screen. We're using 8x8, correct?
Yes, sir.
I see you, Mr. Buckley.
Hey, how you doing there, Kurt?
We're looking for Mr. Winfield to get his video. Anybody see his video?
No, the real thing I see is RD.
That's all I see too.
Well, you see it now?
No.
No.
But you can hear me all.
Yeah. Why don't you sign out, Mr. Winfield, and sign back in? See if that corrects it.
Okay, let me try that. Okay, well.
I'm also expecting Annette Davis Jackson to join us as well, so she hasn't called in yet. Hadn't heard back from anybody else. Mr. Bartell couldn't make it this time. He'll be at next ones. Same with Candace Taylor. There we go. Gotcha.
Okay, all right.
All right. So in the interest of since there's not that many of us, we will try to keep it shorter tonight. But in the interest of being fair to everybody, we've got to try to stay within our time limits, okay? I'm going to try to use these, okay? Please try to at least stay close to it, okay? Just to be fair to everybody. So are you ready to start? Okay. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to our fourth session of Power to the People online debates, where all candidates are welcome, and it's candidate driven. All questions will be answered. So I'd like to welcome our participants tonight. We have Democrat Mr. Richard Winfield, Republican Mr. Derek Grayson, and Independent Mr. Alan Buckley. We will also probably be joined by Republican Annette Davis Jackson. She should be calling in shortly. To get straight to the point, give a 2-minute spiel. I'm going to go based on, we'll go the opposite way this time. We'll go give a 2-minute spiel on why you are running and why everybody should vote for you. Mr. Winfield.
Yeah, I'm running to bring to Washington the fight to really unchain our democracy of all of the blockages of opportunity that have plagued our nation since its founding. And this has been due in large part to our failure to recognize the social rights that need to be recognized and enforced in order for us to exercise our family freedoms, to have economic independence, and to participate as equals in self-government. Particularly now, when we're facing a global pandemic that is threatening the life of everyone, when we're facing an accompanying economic meltdown that is causing a level of economic distress that the world has not experienced in our lifetimes, it's more important than ever that our government recognize its duty to ensure that everyone has a decent livelihood, that everyone has access to health care, that everyone has a roof over their heads, that everyone has access to child care, that everyone has access to education at all levels, that everyone also has access to all the resources they need to defend their rights in the courts. And we as a nation have failed to do that because we have allowed a situation where all of these factors are accessible only under the condition that you have sufficient funds to pay for them. And we are also a nation in which we have been plagued by entrenched racial and gender disadvantage. And that has been perpetuated and intensified because we have not freed the opportunities to which we have access from the condition of wealth, and we've allowed our nation to become the most unequal nation with the least social mobility of any developed country in the world. And that is what I want to change. And I think we need to do it now as a matter of life and death.
Thank you, Mr. Winfield. Okay, I will go next since we're going in reverse alphabetical order. My name is Brian Slowinski. Brian Slowinski. Brian Slowinski. Quick and easy. The reason why I decided to do these debates is it's about money. Not everybody has $1 million to spend on a campaign anymore. It used to be before the 17th Amendment that United States senators were appointed by their state legislators as a check on the federal government. We don't have that anymore. Now it comes down to, a lot of it comes down to money. I want to make a difference when it comes to that. That's the reason why I sponsored these debates, and I want everybody's voice to be heard. Shouldn't matter what party you are, shouldn't matter who you are. What should matter is your ideas. Just like our founding fathers and wrote our Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution as a blueprint for our country. We need to get back to that. We need to follow that blueprint, that plan that they put forth. The only way we can do that is we got to start electing people who are not part of the establishment, that will not be a yes man or a yes woman to the establishment, but will actually stand up for the people of their state and their actual state and be a check and a balance on the federal government. The only way we can do that is we got to stop electing the same old, same old. Albert Einstein once said the definition of insanity is do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. If you keep electing the same two-party establishment type candidates, you can continue to have a country that's going downhill because of they're trampling up, our rights are being trampled on, okay, that shouldn't be. We should get back to the federal government the way it is. The federal government should be about the enumerated rights in the Constitution of the United States and get back to that, and should be worried about our national security, our national defense, and everything else should fall back via the 10th Amendment to the states and the localities. That's what my campaign is about. I'm the libertarian endorsed candidate, the Constitution Party recommended candidate. I am the unity candidate who will, at the door, if I'm elected, is if you come into my office, you got to leave your party designation at the door. You come in to talk, you come talk about issues and how we help the people. That's what kind of a senator I would be. Thank you. Mr. Grayson, your turn, sir.
The reason I'm running is quite simple. The America that I grew up in, I have watched it over the last 20 or so years deteriorate into something that I no longer recognize. It has become clear to me from all that I have experienced that there is virtually no difference between either of the two major parties. While I am running in the Republican Party, it is more of a matter of expediency because of the two-party locked system. And on top of that, the Republican Party, on the surface, identifies with conservatism, and many of the constituents understand what conservatism is, and that is what they look for. However, they are betrayed each and every day by those in the Republican Party who basically are no different than those in the Democrat Party. They tax, they spend, they encroach upon our liberties, and they sit back and watch the Democrats do what the Democrats do while complaining and blaming all of the ills on the country on the Democrats, when it is not just the Democrats, it is the Democrats and the Republicans. And many say, why do I lament so much about this? It is because nobody gets it yet. And I want to make sure that the people get it and understand truly what conservatism and liberty and justice is all about. Thank you, Brian, for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, Mr. Grayson. Mr. Buckley, your turn, sir. 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you. For those who don't know, I have actually run for U.S. Senate 3 times before as the Libertarian Party of Georgia candidate. First in 2004 against Johnny Isaac and Louise Majette. Then again in 2008 in Saxby Chambliss and Jim Martin. Most recently in 2016 against Johnny again and Jim Barstow. And so now I'm running as an independent. Sort of had a falling out with the Libertarian Party. I thought some of the leadership was too extreme in their views. I was always a moderate libertarian. I do believe in the general principles of the Libertarian Party on a moderate basis. So, but you know, why am I running again? Am I crazy? Maybe. As a child, I loved American history and also was raised Christian. So between the two of those, I don't like selfishness. And I love our country, whether that's a mistake or not. But it's a place where we're all going to try to live the rest of our lives. And it's headed in the wrong direction in so many different ways. 2007, the GAO said our debts were going to spiral out of control. They were less than 9 trillion, now we're 27 trillion. We're printing money, it's great, we're borrowing it. Healthcare costs are out of control. We have race relation problems. Now we have the virus dominate the world militarily, but we can't really afford it. And there's really no sense to a lot of what goes on in our country. The bottom line is our system doesn't work on a long-term basis. It doesn't. And I offer solutions on my website to make it work on a long-term basis. I think I'm the only candidate that does that. So that's what I'm about.
All right, thank you, Mr. Buckley. We are now joined by Mr. Fortune. Mr. Fortune, 2 minutes on why you're running, who you are and why you're running. And we're trying to stay within our time limits if we can, sir. So look for the cards.
Great.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name's John Green Fortune, and I'm the Georgia Green Party nominee running for U.S. Senate. I'm running against America's rigged systems, running against our rigged healthcare system, running against an economy rigged for the 1%. I'm running for universal basic income, UBI. UBI to save our economy for the people and not the 1%. I'm running against a rigged justice system that's really an injustice system, a system that criminalizes Black lives, people of color, and poverty. I'm running to ensure that my multiracial family can enjoy the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness promised in the Declaration of Independence. I'm running for social justice, nonviolence, grassroots democracy, and ecological wisdom, the 4 pillars of the Green Party. I'm running to pursue, to follow the track that our Congressman from Georgia, John Lewis, fought for, to fight for justice for all, fight for racial justice. And I'm pleased to have helped scare off a would-be primary challenger in the case of a Judge Michael Johnson, who's really, while African-American, the antithesis of John Lewis, in that he sided with the Secretary of State's office in a decision to allow riggable voting machines to be continued to be used here. And I, in a public forum with John Lewis present, called Judge
Thank you,
Michael
Mr. Fortune.
Johnson as appropriately
Thank you.
a zero, a stenographer for the Secretary of State, and called John Lewis a hero. And
Thank you.
My name's John Fortune. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, I'll just say your names 3 times if you're going over time, just in the interest of fairness. Okay, let's go back. Now we're going to do candidate questions. You ask a question of all the candidates, and we're going to go. You get the choice to pick who you want to go first, since you're the bearer of the question. Mr. Winfield, you can go first this time. You can tell, and you just pick who you want to answer your question. Again, they're given a minute to answer, so it's got to be a fairly reasonable question that you can answer in a minute. And then you give a 30-second rebuttal, and then they get a 30-second response. Okay?
Okay.
Go
I
ahead,
wanted to
Mr.
follow up on a remark you made where you spoke about how money is in many respects corrupting our political process. And I wanted to ask my fellow candidates how you think we have to reform our electoral system to ensure that money does not impede our equal political opportunity. And I'll begin with you, Brian.
Okay. How does money impede our electoral system? How do you reform our electoral system?
Eliminate this problem.
Well, one way would be to eliminate the 17th Amendment, to have another check and balance on the federal government, to have the United States senators actually appointed by their individual state. So thus they will be more attuned to their individual states and representing their state, not representing money that comes into the process when it comes into buying a seat. For example, in our race, we have Ms. Leffler, who basically has millions of dollars she can invest in this campaign, but she's not even willing to come and answer basic questions. I think that's wrong. I think that shows that she's not senatorial and that she doesn't have the gravitas in order to represent the state of Georgia. We need people who are willing to go into meetings and maybe people that don't like you, and listen and learn and go from there. That's how we get better as a society, and that's how we also take money out of the process, because you're taking the funding away, because then it's done by the individual states.
Could I
Go ahead, sir.
ask you something with
Sure.
regard to your response?
Sure.
I mean, why wouldn't allowing the state legislatures to once again pick senators simply perpetuate the same problem, since in the election of representatives to the state legislatures, there is still the issue of money entering into the political process and privileging those who have most access to funds in their races for the state legislature?
Well, my response to that is this, Mr. Winfield. I agree with you to a certain extent, but the best way to reform politics is that which is closer to you. So you have a lot more control of stuff over on your state level than you do at the federal level. We also need to control it on the local level. I would like to see quite honestly, I would like to see us get back to this where you would have debates in every town square, where you could ask the candidates all the different things, and it wouldn't be based on money. It'd be based on who you talk to, who came and talked to you, where they stand on the issues, and have some reasonable dialogue. I'd like to have the old Lincoln Douglas debates again. I think we need to have that in every county and every county seat. At every town square among the candidates, and talk about the issues. Take the money out of the process. Challenge your fellow candidates to talk to one another, learn from each other. I've learned stuff from you gentlemen and the ladies. Every time I talk to you, I learn something. Everybody's a master of something. We need to learn from them, and that's what I would do.
Okay, let me ask the same question to Derek Grayson. I can't hear you. You're muted.
You're muted, Mr. Grayson.
Mr. Winfield, you pose a great question, and it goes to the heart of what is wrong with this country. So I appreciate the question. I would eliminate PACs and super PACs tomorrow. I would eliminate the ability for the media to pick and choose who they're going to put forth before the people. And I would have all debate everywhere on public access channels so that people can tune in and hear each and every candidate from every party. Getting rid of PACs and super PACs and the money puts the election back in the hands of the people and removes the control from the power elites. Thank you.
Can I just ask you a follow-up on that?
Absolutely.
What about the problem of individuals such as Kelly Loeffler using their own wealth to fund their campaigns?
Well, if we're going to take the step of eliminating PACs and super PACs, which levels the playing, or I'm sorry, which gives guys like Collins the ability to rise up and have millions of dollars to spend, like Loeffler, you would eliminate the need for Loeffler to be able to spend those millions, because it wouldn't be allowed. It would be an unfair and undue influence if she's flooding the airwaves with her ads, and the guy who just came up to run from the farm because he wants to make a difference as the founding fathers intended, he wouldn't be able to compete on that level. So the bottom line is equal access for everybody, public access for everybody, and removing money from it, even individuals wanting to spend their own money.
Thank you. Alan Buckley, would you like to answer the question?
Yeah. Brian, let me ask you this though before I answer it.
Sure.
I thought the debate was supposed to be about welfare and warfare.
It's going to be. We're just doing a little bit get to know questions beforehand, because we don't have a moderator. The first part of it was we're using this for the moderator. After this, going to be war. We're going to have a solid hour on warfare and welfare.
All right. I hope we'll keep everybody to the time limits and whatnot, because I think that's already being. No offense, I know you're trying to participate and keep time at the same time. But, anyways, you raise a great question. Does it bother me that Kelly Loeffler is out there spending millions, and it's a drop in the bucket to her? And we all, I think, realize one of the reasons she was appointed was because she's got that money that the Republican Party doesn't need to spend because he can spend it. But I think a lot of Georgians see through that, and we'll see her for what she is. She's a Trump loyalist. Donald Trump can do no wrong. And she's competing with Doug Collins, another Trump loyalist who thinks Trump can do no wrong. So I think we should all, to the extent you think Trump is imperfect, point out these flaws in these two major candidates. It's unfortunate that wealth does have a bearing on our political processes. And, excuse me, but, you know, I offer a lot of solutions to a lot of problems on my website. I do not have a solution that's better than our current system at this moment, but I think about these issues. I appreciate the question.
Can I ask John Fortune to respond to this question of what reforms we need to get money out of the electoral process and perverting our equal political opportunity?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, honestly, I would like to see private money banned. I'd like to see Citizens United overturned. I've worked together with an organization called Move to Amend. I want to see public financing for all campaigns. We have the best political system that can be purchased with our current system. It's really auction to the highest bidder in most circumstances. So public financing, ban on private funds, and the FCC to mandate free advertising for all candidates on the airwaves, through cable systems, and internet advertising systems.
Thank you.
Okay.
Brian, am I allowed to
Yes.
make an answer
Yes,
to the
sir.
question?
Go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I want to second the kind of things that, the kind of reforms that John Fortune and Derek Grayson were making about keeping private wealth out of campaigns, having public financing, having guaranteed access for all candidates. But one thing we also need to think about is ensuring that employees have the resources to be able to run for political office. Because under current conditions, if you run for a major office, such as for Senate, and your campaigning takes up all your time, you have 3 strikes against you. You have to give up your job, which means you have no income, you lose benefits, and then you have no guarantee of having a job back. So I think we need to remedy that problem.
Thank you, Mr. Winfield. Appreciate the answers. Okay, let's go. Mr. Grayson, a question for the panel?
In the essence of time, speaking to what Mr. Buckley brought up, I'm going to forego a question.
Okay. Okay, and I will do the same for myself. Mr. Fortune, would you like to pose a question to the panel?
Right. I know we're going to be talking about warfare. I'm very concerned that we are on the brink of civil war. And as some of you may have heard the comments of some Wilmington, North Carolina police officers, they were eager for the Civil War to start, and I'm paraphrasing, so they could start killing the N-word. And we've recently found out that in Portland, a police captain promoted neo-Nazism, or promoted actual Nazis while he was on the force. And I would like to ask everyone, what can we do to stop these forces attempting to restart the Civil War? You've probably heard of the Boogaloo movement. They want a new Civil War. What can we do?
Okay, who would you like to answer first?
Mr. Buckley, you want to try it?
Sure.
We lost your video, Mr. Buckley.
Can you see me all right?
No, I don't see you. We lost your video.
Some sort of says FaceTime HD camera.
I can see you, Mr. Buckley.
I can see you this moment.
Okay. I got a little square and rectangle on my screen. But, you know, I first of all, I think we need to recognize with the Black Lives Matter what's legitimate and what isn't. And I think at this point it's being run by some Black Lives Matter people, some white liberals, and some Marxists or whatever color they might be, that all have varying goals. I think the Marxists would like to bring down our system. I think if Donald Trump wants to send out troops to a city to protect federal property, he has every right to do that, and I think he should. I think we should recognize what's legitimate, in the Black Lives Matter movement and do something about it. And, George Floyd shouldn't have been put to death the way he was. And we had a system flaw in the Ahmaud Arbery situation. That's going to happen. Those things are going to happen. And if they happen too much, then hopefully the state, like for instance in the Glenn County matter, there's a big article in the AJC on Sunday about how the prosecutor down there is just awful. I mean, he hides evidence from the prosecution, which is illegal. Hopefully the voters down there will kick him out. I mean, he shouldn't be allowed in law enforcement. But we need to fix these problems that are legitimate, and as far as the rest of it, just say enough is enough. And that's, I think, what we need to do about it. People need to realize a lot of it is misdirected and is aimed at goals other than having anything to do with, the Floyd and Arbery matters. So.
Okay. Mr. Slawinski, would you like to address the question?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Again, what would you do to stop us from having a civil war? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, first thing, we got to communicate. That's the reason for a forum like this is we need to communicate whether we're Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, Green, Constitution. We need to be talking to one another. Right now, part of the problem is that we have this identity politics, the tribalization of America, where you have the Democrats who are the blues, and you have the Republicans who are the reds. And the Democrats propose something, the Republicans automatically say it's bad, and vice versa. The Republicans propose something, the Democrats say it's bad. We need to get away from that. We need to start checking parties at the door. When you go to Washington, D.C., you got to check the parties at the door and go there to represent the people of your state and the people. We the people again. We're not doing that. So how do we stop all this? Well, first off, we have to have control of the streets. And those mayors in those communities that are not bringing about order to their streets, they need to go down there and talk to the people. Okay, and talk and try to find out what their actual grievances are. And anybody that is doing anything physical or trying to create a riot, they need to be arrested. Period. And all the mayors should come out and say that. We need to get a handle on that kind of violence throughout our country. And President Trump has every right to protect federal property. But other than that, he should not go into local areas or state areas unless he's asked by either the local officials or the state officials. That should be on the local officials should ask the governor for help, and then they can call it National Guard as far as that goes. But as far as protecting federal buildings, that's totally that's totally up to the president's prerogative. Okay. Now.
So it's their fault?
Well, they can hear you right now.
Gives somebody else in this.
You gotta turn that off.
Mute. Okay. All right. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But what we need to do is we need to talk to one another and stop this. It's us versus them. We're all in this together. The United States stands for us. We need to start discussing us, not them. Okay? Start discussing we, us, how we can make things better for everyone. The best way is to have this economy going again and to get a handle on this COVID crisis and get a handle on all this violence. That starts at the local level. It starts with the mayors and the governors, and they need to start to get a handle on it. And that needs to happen now. Okay? As far as any kind of police violence, we need to stop that as well. Well, part of the problem is the unions are set up so they keep putting people back onto the force when they shouldn't be back onto the force. That's how I would solve some of that. So anyway, sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Fortune. You next person.
Can't hear you.
You're muted, John.
Oh, Mr. Grayson.
First off, I don't believe that there's going to be a civil war. What we see happening in these cities, if you just look at the facts, number one, they are liberal ran cities where you have mayors that have deliberately pulled back police forces and allowed what we have seen to take place. And that was born out of the remarks by the Baltimore mayor, who said, let them get it off their chest. Well, of course, I'm paraphrasing, but she basically said, let them riot, let them loot. And that's what we have seen in Atlanta. That's what we have seen in Minneapolis. That's what we're seeing in Portland, et cetera, et cetera. Racists have always been with us. They aren't going anywhere. There will be cops who get hired and believe in Nazism. There are blacks who are going to believe in Marxism and want the city or our system taken down. Just like that, there are people that would like to see the Republican Party die, and people would like to see the Democrat Party die. They have always been with us. They are never going anywhere. However, the vast majority of people in this country are peaceful. The vast majority of people in this country are not racist, and the vast majority of people in this country are not going to participate in any type of civil war. I will defend myself and my family if I am attacked. So make no mistake about that. However, I am not going to go and take to the streets to shoot Mr. Buckley or Mr. Fortune or any of you gentlemen because you are white. And most black people are the same way. So I believe people like Trump and others of like mind in places where we don't see this happening will do the right thing. And I believe if these mayors and some of these cities don't step up and start doing the right thing, Trump is going to do what's necessary. The mayor of Chicago has already acquiesced and has allowed troops, or not troops, but law enforcement from the federal government into Chicago, where she was adamant initially about not letting that happen. But I have marked since July, a child, a black child, has been killed every weekend since the July 4th weekend by other black people. And so who is trying to do something about it? Trump is the one stepping up and saying, if you don't do something about it, I am. And so I do not believe that there's going to be a civil war.
Mr. Winfield, could you address the question? And I am particularly concerned with police collusion with, let's say, the Boogaloo movements as they invaded state capitals, for instance. So, hoping someone would address that.
I mean, look, it's not just police collusion. It's a collusion of the government and of our president, who has, expressed his tolerance and to some degree sanctioned such groups. And we find in every developed country today a rise of fascist movements that are stressing ancestry, that are stressing identity politics, that are professing an anti-democratic nationalism, where one kind of ancestry is privileged over all others, and people who are either minorities or immigrants are being vilified. And one expression of this is Trump's intention to nullify the 14th Amendment regarding how anyone born in this country is automatically a citizen. nullify that as if he could do so by an executive order. But I think it's very important to recognize, we have to recognize that democracy and equal political opportunity it involves is something where we don't want to be a nation state, where what it means to be a citizen is tied to any particular kind of ethnic identity, religion, or any kind of ancestry. And the other side of it is that in all developed nations, there is economic anxiety about declining manufacturing sectors and the like, and the fact that in none of these nations is there a job guarantee, and all of these nations are being sort of facing huge onslaughts of desperate immigrants, facing the effects of climate change on their local economies and political upheaval and repression. And it's easy to villainize these immigrants who are regarded as taking away jobs when we don't have a job guarantee. So I think we also have to act on that front. We have to ensure that everyone who wants to work will have an opportunity. Government can act as the employer of last resort, and we can remove that kind of fear of joblessness, which stokes and fuels identity politics and this renaissance of a new fascist movement, both here and abroad.
I'd like to address one of your questions.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Fortune.
So a Rwandan refugee came and spoke in Atlanta, and I attended his discussion of fleeing the ethnic violence that occurred in their country. And he was asked, how can such a thing happen? How can people take knives and go after their neighbors? And he answered, well, when the leaders do not show leadership and give permission for such ethnically divisive rhetoric, that's what leads to ethnic cleansing and the deaths of different ethnic groups. And unfortunately, our president, when he commented on the Charlottesburg situation, he gave license to the white supremacists, and he continues to stoke division. And this division threatens the lives of everyone in this nation. And honestly, I'm very concerned that he will use this division to do extra constitutional actions. And I do want to unite this nation behind our Constitution and to expand our constitutional rights so to include that of our basic human rights as well. And thank you very much for your answers.
All right. Now we'll get back to what we are here for, the main topic, which is warfare and welfare. Address it for 5 minutes any way you would like, and then after every candidate has had a chance to give their 5 minutes, we're going to kind of have a round robin where we give everybody at least a minute to talk on something, and try to keep it, try to keep it so we're learning from each other, and I think that's the best for everyone. So you got 5 minutes to talk about where you stand on warfare and welfare and what you would do about each one. So in that interest, we will start first with, let's go in the middle first. Mr. Fortune, you can go first. Go ahead, sir. 5 minutes, sir.
I've been very concerned about the beating of drums for war in this country, which has occurred long before I was born. And my parents are children who were impacted by World War II. They both had PTSD, and they lived in Holland during World War II and came to this country and grew up here and were shocked by what America was doing post World War II around the world. The CIA's overthrow of governments from the 1950s through today. The CIA ended up destabilizing many countries, and in the 1950s they destabilized Iran and overthrew a democratic government in Iran, and democratic government in Guatemala was overthrown. And these, using the CIA as the initial forces in overthrowing government really is an act of war. And unfortunately, much of the crises in different countries across the world, and so many of them, those countries have been initially destabilized by the CIA. We intervened in the elections and the affairs of Russia once the Soviet Union broke up. And what did we implement there? By pushing unsavory characters like Boris Yeltsin, we established a mobster state. This was actually, and now we complain that Vladimir Putin acts like a thug, but this is the sort of government we pushed onto the Soviet Union. And there have been, now we have saber-rattling with China, and our president's inflaming tensions by creating arbitrary trade rules with China. We don't need a war with China. But nonetheless, that's one of the trajectories that our president has put us on. Even though we receive so many of our manufactured goods from China, our plane parts are manufactured in China, and so much critical material for our economy is coming from China, and yet we have this extremist rhetoric and calls for war with China. I did think I spoke before about a trade representative in Trump's office who's noted the COVID virus. Unfortunately, Mr. Navarro does not have any sort of a reasonable perception of how we can coexist with China. But I am calling for peace. The Green Party is the party of peace, and we need to quit the drumbeat of war. We need to cut the military budget in half and spend those funds on a Green New Deal so that we can have an energy future without putting carbon into our atmosphere. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Fortune. Mr. Buckley, would you like to go next? Please address warfare and welfare. Any way you'd like to address it, sir. You have 5 minutes.
As far as warfare, I always want us to have the strongest military in the world by far. We've got that now. We spend roughly what the rest of the world combined spends on military endeavors. It's been that way for a long time. We do have the strongest military by far. Anyone harmed or injured due to military service should be made whole as much as possible. But we don't need 800 plus foreign military bases when the rest of the world combined has approximately 60, and we live in a nuclear age. So I have a little map here that's on my website that unfortunately didn't come out in color, but I'll stick it up to the, I don't know if you can see that. Can everybody see that? That's Italy. And that's over 100 military bases, U.S. military bases in Italy. To me, that's insanity. You know, I understand how this all came about. A lot of us know our history of World War II and how we ended up dominating the Pacific and basically staying there. And now we've got the situation in the Southeast where South Korea is reliant upon us, Japan is reliant upon us, and I give Trump credit for trying to get more money out of them to serve as the local policeman. But in the long term, we're going to have to figure out what our policy is with respect to China, because their plan is to become the dominant player in the South China Sea, and eventually they will attempt to overtake Taiwan, as they are now doing with respect to Hong Kong. And while I do think that we should reduce our foreign intervention in many ways, I would like to see NATO and us work with NATO to put our foot down with respect to Hong Kong. What's happening there is a violation of what they promised. And I think it's actually hurting them right now, because a lot of European countries are going against them with respect to Huawei. I don't know if that's the correct way to pronounce the company, but a lot of them, part of the reasoning is because of what they're doing in Hong Kong. But as far as the Middle East, I have several articles on my website that say we need to get out. We need to do it over time and do it in a smart manner. The two main reasons that have existed for a long time were protection of Israel and protection of oil. You know, where Israel is doing quite well in the Middle East. Its only enemy really is Iran, but every other country in the Middle East, except for Syria, does not get along with Iran, and Israel pretty much gets along with the rest of them. So again, we are energy independent. I have some really good articles on the website. I'm absolutely against the use of torture, and I have materials regarding that on the website. So one more thing is, you know, I've talked about the finances. In 2011, Admiral Mike Mullen, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, when asked, what is our nation's greatest national security threat? And he said, I've said many times, it's our national debt. And I know that's beyond my little 5 minutes here, but it's covered on my website. And that's the way, historically, countries such as the U.S. have collapsed. As far as welfare, I annually write a book called Legal Handbook for Financial Planning in whatever year it is. This is a 2019 version. I have a 2020, I just don't have one at home. But in it, I have a chapter on entitlements, chapter 11. It's one of the most boring ones, but incident there too. I wrote a book with a professor at Georgia State, a PhD in finance several years ago, called Why Work? How the federal entitlements and tax systems equalize income and wealth. And here's a chart of, you can see that, that's how the system works for a family of four between 10,000 and 25,000 of income. You see how a person making 10,000 actually gets 33,000. Person making 25 actually gets about 50 between entitlements and tax breaks. When you throw in the loss of tax breaks and entitlements, as they move up the chain, between 29,000 and 50,000, they actually make less than if they were making 29,000. We call this the ditch in our little book. That's insanity. It's got to end. We've got to have a system where you have a straight line, where things get better as you make more money. We've got to stop encouraging single parenthood. On my website, I note how our system encourages single parenthood. That's got to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, for staying right on time. Next, Mr. Winfield, could you please give us 5 minutes on warfare and welfare, however you'd like to use it, sir?
Sure. No, I think it's obvious that international conflict is something that can be disastrous for our welfare. And I think it's also becoming very clear under the boot of the pandemic how there are these global problems that are bearing down on all of us, that are putting our lives and our livelihood in jeopardy. One, of course, is the phenomenon of pandemics, and the coronavirus is not going to be the last. And it's obvious more than ever that these can only be combated through very significant international cooperation, where nations have to mobilize resources to ensure that wherever such things break out, the equipment, the PPEs, the testing, whatever medical treatment is necessary has to be provided so that these can be stamped out before they spread throughout the world and threaten the lives and prosperity of people. Climate change has been recognized by our military and intelligence services as the greatest threat to our security. And it is not on holiday during this pandemic. It is continuing to advance and is going to be a major source of international conflict, as different regions of the world are going to find themselves losing territory to rising oceans, are going to find themselves subject to widespread desertification and other kinds of climate emergencies that are going to be destroying the ability of their territory to support their people. And it's going to produce the greatest migration crisis the world has ever seen, with all of the conflicts that is going to involve. So I think if we really want to think about the imminence of war, we have to take seriously the global threats of climate change and pandemics, and engage in a very proactive international cooperation, mobilize the resources, and make this one of the pillars of our foreign policy, of having an international Green New Deal, which not only aims at making a transition to renewable energy, preferably by 2030, and certainly by 2050, but to have the side of it being a New Deal, namely that we have to ensure that all those peoples of the world whose livelihoods currently depend upon the fossil fuel industry will be provided with alternatives. And this is going to be something that will be crucial in avoiding international conflicts. Now, we have to avoid falling into a new arms race, because we see the current administration beginning to do that. First of all, by setting up a space force and pushing ahead to militarize space, as other nations are doing to some degree, China, and to some degree Russia. We really have to ensure that space be kept demilitarized. It becomes very destabilizing with regard to modern warfare, because if you allow anti-satellite weapons to be operative, this becomes a real threat to any modern military. And we have to demilitarize space. But on the other hand, we also have to think about the threat of nuclear weapons. Despite the fact that the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union is no more, Russia and the United States still have far, far too many nuclear weapons, certainly enough to create a nuclear holocaust. And still, our president has a button, as I assume his counterpart in Russia does, Putin, whereby an individual can unilaterally throw the world into nuclear destruction. And back in the day, I think there are a number of us who are old enough to remember when we were living under the threat of a nuclear Armageddon. It doesn't take that much to create nuclear winter, to destroy the ozone layer, to destroy all electronics on Earth with a satellite explosion, an atmospheric explosion of nuclear weapons. This remains a real threat. We have to eliminate any possibility of a doomsday machine scenario. We have to engage in negotiations with Russia to drastically reduce our nuclear weapons so that neither side has enough so that we have to worry about first strikes and have to have anything like a button. We need to really clamp down on nuclear proliferation because we can't afford to allow other nations to engage in nuclear warfare. We can't allow Pakistan and India to face off, or in the Middle East, nations like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Israel. And I think in this reason also we have to cut back all of the $1 trillion we have allocated to renew our nuclear forces. We really have to diminish them as much as possible and make our military smart. It's very bloated. As has been mentioned, we have far, far too many foreign bases. We certainly do not need them. On the other hand, if we are going to defend freedom in the world, we don't want to become isolationists. That doesn't mean we engage in regime change, but we should be there to assist nations who are trying to stand up for their rights. And that doesn't mean sending in our own troops, but it is important that we maintain a certain degree of military strength. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Winfield. Next, Mr. Grayson, you have 5 minutes, sir.
You say Grayson?
Mr. Grayson, yes, go ahead, sir.
Okay. Butter and bullets. Butter and bullets. That's what this is about. And the government is in the middle. So, bullets. That is for the war machine. Now, I'm not talking about our military. I'm a veteran. Love the military. If I could re-enlist right now, I would. I'd get myself out there on a ship and taxi planes off of that carrier. Be that as it may, we have had a system that we have lived under where we have engaged in perpetual regime change or manipulation of other countries for our own benefit. The one percenters, the ones who profit from bullets, and then in the welfare, contrasting with that, we have a system, again, the federal government, that has engaged in creating a sense of dependency upon the government, the greatest of which, given to us by FDR and LBJ, is generational welfare that I have watched for 30 years. As a black man, I didn't understand it as a child, but when I got into my mid-20s and began to research, I saw this. The grandmother is on welfare, the daughter is on welfare, the granddaughter grows up to get on welfare, the great-granddaughter grows up to get on welfare. So it's that mental conditioning. Now, how does this persist? Government, the politicians, you have the military-industrial complex and their lobbyists getting what they need from the politicians who provide them with the bullets. And everybody makes money. When we blew the hell out of Iraq, American companies went in and rebuilt it. When we carpet bomb somebody, money is given to Lockheed and all of the companies that manufacture those bombs. And then we give aid to foreign countries under the guise of trying to help them. And they in turn turn around and buy those bombs back from U.S. manufacturers. So everybody is making money off of bullets. And that is why we have been in the perpetual wars until Donald Trump got in office. There's not been a move towards any regime change since he got in office. I think That is clear for people who follow this like I do. But many still can't see it. They still think that Trump is the worst thing since we didn't have toilet paper, for lack of a better word. But moving on along, here comes the butter. When you create a sense of entitlement or dependency amongst the poor, what are they going to do? They are going to be manipulated towards the party and the people that promised them everything. But I can say one thing for sure: those that have become accustomed to welfare aren't looking for a job. So I just want to put that out there. But the bottom line is, they promised them butter at one end of the spectrum for welfare, and they give them bullets at the other end of the spectrum for the war machine. And I'm not talking about the soldier that's caught in the middle. I'm not talking about Joe Blow citizen like myself, who educated himself by going to school, getting a job, working, and providing for myself and my family. I'm talking about politicians who personally enrich themselves and the one percenters making bank off of war. And I'm talking about those that have become dependent upon the system, looking for it to always provide a way for them. And government is not the way for them. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Grayson. I think Mr. Fortune, have you commented yet? I don't remember.
I have.
You have, so I guess I'm left. Okay, I will address it quickly. Well, first off, we have warfare and welfare. Let's address them in that order. Warfare. Well, first off, as we have over 800 bases. We don't need that many bases. I would work to cut our bases at a minimum by 2/3 around the world. We don't need that many bases. If all the other countries together have 60 bases, we can do with 1/3 of the bases that we have right now and just keep the strategic ones that we need. Other than that, I would close them. Okay, that's actually welfare for the military. Okay, and the countries that they're in actually, and that's helping support those countries. I think we have a much better way to do that, and that would be through trade with everyone. You know, trade butter with people, not guns, not bullets. That's what we need to trade. The more butter we trade back and forth, and we're friendly when it comes to that, that's better for everyone. I haven't seen this yet, but maybe a little bit of addressed it. I would get us some work on a strategic plan to get us out safely out of Afghanistan and any other Middle East country. We don't need to be there. Afghanistan has been the killer of empires, whether it be the British Empire, the Russian Empire, or the American Empire. We don't need to be there, okay? We need to be out of Afghanistan, and we don't need to be anywhere where we don't have a national security or a national strategic interest. Other than that, we don't need to be there, okay? As far as welfare goes, I agree with Mr. Grayson when he talked about since we've become too dependent on government since FDR. It was doubly increased with LBJ when he basically made it easier to basically get the black gentleman out of the household when it comes to black families. If you take the dad out of the situation and you have the government replaced through money, that's wrong. You make them dependent on the system. That's wrong, and it's been generational, and we need to stop that. We can no longer do that. We can no longer afford that, and it also shouldn't be done on the federal level. That's welfare. That type of welfare should be done on the state and local level, and actually the best place to do it would be through your churches. Churches have dropped the ball when it comes to that, and I'd like to see more churches actually take that to heart and get back to helping people in their community. As far as our military budget, we definitely need to have the strongest and the best equipped, but we can do it a lot more cheaply than it's being done right now. And I don't mean cheaply by having cheap goods. I mean inexpensively. We need to look at our budgets with a fine-tooth comb and go through that. And the Pentagon is notorious for overspending on things, and we need to actually have somebody in Washington D.C. that's not going to give carte blanche to the military. The Republicans have been very pro-military, but they've also done it at the expense of our people. The Democrats have as well. The Republicans and Democrats voted to get us into Afghanistan. Okay, they didn't stop it. They could have stopped it. Any of the United States senators who were there could easily have stopped that if they would have worked together to filibuster. But nobody wanted to do it. Nobody wanted to step up. Nobody wanted to stand up against this unconstitutional military excursions throughout the world. If we're going to go somewhere, we need to have a national interest. And other than defense of this country, we shouldn't be going anywhere anything offensive. Okay, unless it's a declaration of war by Congress. Other than that, we don't need to be there. And that's what I would work to implement in our next Congress. And I would also work to work on our welfare, bring that back to the states and the local level and back to the churches, and get the federal government out of the welfare system, because it's, first off, it's not even authorized to do that. Okay, it's they've pretty much jumped the shark when it comes to that. They started under FDR with all the New Deal programs, and it was continued by LBJ with the Great Society. Yes, we need to help people who can't help themselves, but that needs to be on the state and local level and through our churches. That's the best way to know what's going on, and it shouldn't be funded on the federal level. And again, as far as our military goes, keep us strong, keep us smart, keep us fit, but keep us lean. Thank you. Okay, now we're gonna open it up for discussion. Would anybody like to comment on a minute on anything anybody else had to say? Please just raise your hand, and we'll try to work on it that way. Okay, Mr. Whitfield, you raised your hand first. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, there was several people made comments connecting FDR and LBJ, the Great Society, and the New Deal. I think there was one very important difference between a crucial aspect of the New Deal and the Great Society of LBJ, which bears upon welfare. FDR believed that there was a right to work, a true right to work, that everyone had a right to a job at a fair wage, and that when the market failed to provide that, as it periodically does, in fact, as always, it fails to have full employment, it's the responsibility of government to step up and offer those who are willing and able to work a job, the ability to stand up on their feet, not to receive welfare, but to be able to be independent and participate in the creation of wealth. And that was not something that was carried over into the Great Society. And of course, the New Deal programs never had enough job creation to eliminate unemployment until World War II came around. But what we've had is a situation where $1 trillion is spent at a federal state level for welfare programs that keep people in dependence, where they're not able to have a job that pays enough to be able to support themselves. Instead, they find themselves in situations where it's more advantageous not to work, because if they work, they can't pay for childcare, which they would have to be able to pay for to be able to go to work if they're a parent with children. Okay. So we have to think about eliminating these problems. And I think that, by the way, is a reason for why we need a federal job guarantee and not universal basic income, which I think is a form of welfare that creates a kind of two-tiered society between those who just live on the dole of a universal basic income, which is a poverty income, and those who are earning a living and also receiving that dole. I think instead we would have to focus upon achieving full employment, letting everyone, in a sense, fulfill the American dream, where if you work hard, you can support yourself and your family. We have to eliminate poverty wages. We have to ensure that people make enough to survive. The local Fox News station in Atlanta, of all places, acknowledged recently that you need to make over $19 an hour to be able to survive at all. And our minimum wage is $7.25. We've got to raise it up to 20 or so,
Okay.
and let it keep pace with our rising.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Winfield. Next, Mr. Buckley, you have your hand up, sir.
As far as, let me just say this, a lot of people, I'm a CPA and an attorney, and so as a CPA, I run numbers a lot of times, and as I pointed out, I wrote this book with this professor a few years ago, and we punched in a bunch of numbers and found the ditch where people who make $29,000 have a higher standard of living than people making $48,000 with a family of four because of all the entitlements and handouts and whatnot that the lower income people get. Well, now we have a society where a lot of people understand these entitlements, and if you go to certain states, for instance, upstate New York, the people just work in the summer season. They make enough to get to that sweet spot where they get all the federal entitlements, all the tax credit, mainly the earned income tax credit, and then they stop. And they come out better than they would be, than they would come out if they made another 20,000. And that's insanity. And also, as part of running these numbers, the fight for 15, to go from $10 to $15 an hour at a fast food restaurant. I ran an example with a three-person family. What would be the impact of going from $10 to $15 an hour, assuming they get ordinary entitlements? Well, they would get a 15% raise, not a 50% raise, not from 10 to 15. They would get a 15% raise because they would start losing a lot of entitlements and tax credits. So a lot of these people who think we're just going to jump from this number to that number and it's going to be a direct correlation, it's not. Lastly, for Mr. Winfield, I know you mean well, I think, but a lot of people make less than $20 an hour. You want to guarantee everybody a $20 per hour federal job. There's not enough jobs in the federal government to do that, and you would really throw a monkey wrench into the economy if you did that, because a lot of companies have to compete with foreign companies that have workers who work at less than $12 or $15 an hour. So a lot of these companies are struggling now to compete at $14, $15, $16 an hour for manual labor. So I personally don't think that's a good idea. I don't mean to be mean about it. But,
Can I respond to that? I mean, since 1968,
1 minute.
I'm sorry.
1 minute, Mr. Winfield, okay?
Since 1968, wages in the United States have stagnated, whereas the wealth of our nation has more than doubled. And wages now take up a smaller share of our national income than they ever have since any records have been kept. There is plenty of room in terms of our economy to bring people up to a level whereby they can escape having to depend upon entitlements, where they can stand on their own 2 feet. And we have the largest internal market in the world, in human history, in fact. We can arrange our economy in such a way that we can have a decent standard of living for everyone and do so in a world in which many other countries are paying people much, much less. But we can take control of our commerce so that we protect our jobs and ensure that people have a decent standard.
can I respond to that?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Buckley. 1 minute, sir. Or actually, 30 seconds. Sorry.
There are a number of ways for our system to collapse, including losing the middle class. If we have a system where we have a very small percent of rich people, which we do, and they're very rich, we have huge disparities in wealth, and we have a huge percentage of people who are at the lower end, and we have no middle class. The system is, we're going to have a revolution. So I agree that we need to do things to preserve that middle class, but I don't think your solution, $20 an hour, is a good one. And I think, you should think about that a bit. But let me say this. As an attorney, I go to seminars talking about estate planning and whatnot. And half of the seminar is spent on figuring out how to make people poor enough to get all these entitlements. And so you have a huge section of society that's trying to become poor enough to get this stuff. That's got to stop. The system has got to be set up, like I said, a straight line. The more income you make, the better off you are. It's got to go up like that always. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Grayson's next in the queue. Mr. Grayson, go ahead, sir. I believe you're on mute. Unmute yourself.
I,
There you go.
Yes, I want to respond to Mr. Winfield, who mentioned FDR and LBJ, as I had pointed out. FDR gave us the infrastructure, and I think what many people miss in a lot of things is not understanding that the groundwork was laid earlier. So once the welfare infrastructure system was put into place, LBJ came along, and I think Mr. Buckley referenced that. It was called man in the house rule, and when you remove the father from the household, the women learned to depend on the government, and the government became the father, and the man realized, well, I can just drop babies and hang out and disappear when the social work comes around. And that became a way of life. But that would not have been possible had not FDR laid the groundwork. And the other thing that I want to point out, I heard the word entitlement. It's amazing how words get screwed up. Social Security is an entitlement because I paid into it. I'm entitled to get back what I put in. Food stamps are not an entitlement. That's something you did not earn that is being taken from someone else and redistributed to you. Section 8 is something you did not earn. It is something that has been taken from someone else and being redistributed to others. So I wish we would, words have meaning. And when you start associating welfare with entitlement, then it no longer has any meaning. And when people actually get up and go and work for something, Mr. Buckley is an attorney. I'm sure all of you are educated men that took the time to go and get for yourselves so you can do the things that you do, like I did. And so you earned that. And nobody took from someone else to get it to you. That is what we need to be encouraging in this country, providing equal access and equal opportunity, because everybody is not going to go and rise to the level that someone else may. That's why everybody can't make $20 an hour. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Winfield, since you were named, you have 1 minute to respond, sir.
Yeah, well, everyone can make $20 an hour because the national wealth is such that if you were to average it over the 160 million breadwinners, it comes to over $100,000. We can raise the bottom to what is necessary to be able to support yourself and be able to exercise your freedoms. I mean, after all, we've had minimum wages because if the market is left to its own design, it will go as low as it can and leave people in a situation where they can be destitute. It will have child labor, etc. We need to provide certain guidelines so that businesses can do the right thing and remain competitive, because all of them are going to be compelled to operate on that basis and figure out how to make it be something whereby they can stay solvent. Now, I think the proper approach is to think about how we deal with public schools if they were fairly funded. Namely, no one has to pay for them. There are no means tests, and I think that should apply to all the things that we need to advance ourselves, to exercise our opportunities. Instead of having means tests and the kind of entitlement issues that Alan Buckley was speaking about, we instead ensure that everyone has access to affordable housing, to health care, to education at all levels, and to, legal care.
Right.
Stop.
Thank you. Mr. Fortune, you would like to speak, sir? You're up, sir. Go ahead. Mr. Fortune.
Great. I'd just like to address a number of issues that have been brought up. Social Security, for most of us, is insurance that we pay into and that we get funds back out of. But While I don't really have an issue with Professor Winfield's position on guaranteed jobs, I do want to address the universal basic income program that is an alternate way to bring people out of poverty and homelessness and restores dignity to and human rights to American citizens. As I see it, universal basic income should pay $2,080 a month to everyone. And if you are making good wages at a job that's, well, let's say you are already making $20-some an hour, and thus have a 40K income, at the end of the year, the taxes can pull out an excess amount. So because you really didn't need the $2,080 a month that we are proposing sending to every adult in this country. And I do want to see our manufacturing sector restored. We need to have border adjustments for goods that are coming in that are produced with slave labor, with fossil fuels, with wages that are unlivable. These items should have a premium that the importer needs to pay. And this has been addressed in a bill that purports to solve the carbon dioxide-based climate crisis, and we can fix all these problems with the pandemic platform of the Green Party.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Grayson, you would like to speak, sir? Go ahead. Can't hear you, Mr. Grayson.
I called myself trying to unraise my hand.
Okay.
My apologies, but I do believe Mr. Buckley would like to speak.
Okay, Mr. Buckley, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Derek, when I'm talking about entitlements, I'm talking about something that you are just by law entitled to, regardless of whether you paid into it or not. So terminology, whatever you want to call it. But on my website under entitlements, I actually have a bill that proposes reasonable reductions to Medicare and Social Security by gradually moving the retirement age to age 70, adjusting it every decade based on changing life expectancy. I know that's not politically desirable, but my campaign is about saving tomorrow, making it as good as or better than today. That's absolutely necessary. I have an article on there by a guy from the Urban Institute, Gene Sterling, another guy named Quackenbush. I think that's how you pronounce his name. It's the very beginning of the entitlement section of my website. And they cover Social Security and Medicare taxes versus benefits. They go back to the very early days and then carry you forward into the future to like I think 2050 or 2060. And everybody, except for the very wealthy, profit tremendously from both Medicare and Social Security in terms of what they get out versus what they put in. And the lower your income, the better your return on investment is. And that's just not the way it's supposed to be. You're supposed to get out what you put in. But that's the problem with the democracy. Democracies collapse and republics collapse over loose fiscal policy that politicians want to compete to take less and give more, take less and give more. And as Derek said earlier, along the way, take care of the military industrial establishment, and they all paid into the pot to get their palms greased, and then keep the people on the lower end on the government dole and make them dependent. And then the Democrats, why a lot of these people are voting Democrat is beyond me, because I think as Derek pointed out, LBJ put him in this box, and it's a real problem. So in any event, again, we need to reform entitlements. I gave you my definition of entitlements. There's 60 to 70% of federal spending. The debts are going to spiral out of control. Right now, we're just printing money at the same rate that we're borrowing it. financial insanity is taking place, and it's going to continue to take place as long as we have people in office who allow it to take place.
All right, Mr. Grayson, you have your hand up, sir. Go ahead.
I want to take a moment to acknowledge something that I have come to realize. I think all of us here have one thing in common that we recognize, and that is that people in Washington, D.C. really, and I'm talking about the typical Democrat and the Republican, they really don't care about the people. They care more about personally enriching themselves. And I know Mr. Winfield is a Democrat. I don't hold that against you, but I sense that you want the best for people. You want people to have, a life. I get that. Mr. Buckley wants, fiscal responsibility so that there is something left. I get that. It would be a wonderful thing if we could all work together to get rid of the politicians that have broken this country and beguiled the people on both sides with their lives. I just wanted to make that observation. Thank you.
Great observation. Completely agree.
Would you like any other comment, Mr. Buckley?
No, I just completely agree with what Derek just said. And, one thing, I don't want to win this race. Doug Collins, I think he's a phony. I don't want to use the word hypocrite, but I think he's a phony. Ms. Loeffler seems like a nice, rich person, but I don't think she's really a senator. I think all of us on the phone, although we have differing views, are much more passionate about and having more in-depth thoughts about the matters than I've seen out of them. And then you have on the Democrat side, Raphael Warnock, who has absolutely nothing on his campaign website. Nothing. No issues. Zero. And, I think we all need to call him out on this. And what's unfortunate is the AJC gave Mr. Warnock a few months ago a full, huge write-up. Why? Because the AJC is a left-leaning newspaper. Let's face it. Why does that guy deserve anything? Because Stacey Abrams said he's the anointed one? That should make you Democrats in the panel sick. I guess we only have one Democrat on the panel. But, and then, Ed Tarver, I met Ed a few times. He's a nice guy. He's got Zippo on his website. All I get are emails from him every day. Send me some money. Send me some money. Why would I send you money when you're my opponent and you have nothing on the issues, okay? So we need to get something going on this as a group because these people cannot get in office. It would just be a moral wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to address the group if you don't mind. I'm trying to run this a little bit, but I just want to comment a little bit. I like what was just said. I agree that I think anybody on the group here would be 10 times better than the ones who are not here right now, especially the $1 million candidates, because we actually are passionate about where we stand on issues. We're willing to be here. We're willing to listen. We're willing to take it to the people. You don't see that with Reverend Warnock and having no issues at all on his website. You don't see that from Mr. Lieberman, who basically he's the son of a senator. Well, great, you're a son of a senator. Where do you stand on the issues? Where are you talking to people? Why are you not here addressing the actual issues out there? Same with Mr. Collins, and same with Ms. Loeffler. They're willing to take pot shots at each other, but they're unwilling to really, truly address the issues that are in front of us. I mean, you have Ms. Loeffler now commenting about Mr. Collins being a defense attorney and coming to people's defense. Well, everybody has a right to a lawyer, and that should. Why are you even questioning that, Senator Loeffler? You shouldn't even question that. Everybody's innocent until proven guilty, and everybody should have their right to an attorney. Done. Shouldn't even be questioning that. Okay, and Congressman Collins has one of the worst voting records out there when it comes to supporting more and more government, and we need to call him out on that as well. Same with anybody else that decides they're too good to be able to talk to the people. We need to call them out, and as a group, we need to do that. If we need to do something different, if you have any other suggestions, I'm up for it, because I would take anybody that's on this panel versus those. Because right now, all they're doing is, flapping their lips, and then it comes back down to the point where they're politicians, and you know when a politician lies? When they open their mouth. We're not politicians. We're us. We're we, and we need to work together to do what's best for Georgia and what's best for this country. That's what I offer. That's what my candidacy offers. I'm someone who used to be a Democrat, and I refuse to be a yes man. I mean, I grew up in Minnesota, the second most Democratic district in the whole state of Minnesota in the 60s and 70s. I grew up a John F. Kennedy pro-life fiscal Democrat. But when I started to address the fiscal problems and on how do you pay for things, I was pretty much thrown out of the Democratic Party, and also because I was pro-life. That's wrong. Same is true when it comes to the Republican Party. I worked my way through the Republican Party 14 different times. I was elected as a grassroots candidate, unelected position, whether it be as a precinct chairman. I served as a district chairman. I served on county committees. I served on district committees. I was a district treasurer. I was a state committeeman from both districts, both the 12th and 10th congressional district. I was chairman of the local Republican Party. So what happens in 2016? I come out early in 2015 as a vocal supporter of Donald Trump. When it comes time in March, when it comes time for the county convention, my son, who's 18 years old, who at the time in 2016 had been coming to all these different Republican events since he was very little, and a chance to be able to go and vote and become a delegate, he was blackballed, as was I, from going on to any other conventions, as were anybody else that was a minority or black or youth. And that's wrong, because we challenged the slate, and basically with an up or down vote, they wouldn't allow anybody to challenge that, and that's wrong. That's the reason why I set up these debates, because I want anybody, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, Green, Constitution, Libertarian, to be involved, to get your name out and get your issues out. Because we need people who are willing to cooperate, but also call the two-party system when they do things wrong. We don't need yes men and women out there. We need people who are going to stand for this country again. And the only way we're going to do that is get people who are passionate about standing up for what's right in this country again. If we can do that, one person in the United States Senate can make a difference. Because not only through the use of filibuster, yes, they can have cloture motions, but most senators will not vote against you for cloture. Why? Because sometimes they might have an issue that might come up. But there's also other ways that you can stop bad bills. You can demand that we get back to the rules of order, get back to the 12 spending bills, which they need to be doing. Otherwise, you're not going to vote on them. Don't vote for any omnibus bills that are out of control. Don't vote for any continuing resolutions that continue to raise America's credit card. That's what I offer. Thank you. Who would like to be next?
Can I make a comment?
Sure, sir.
Following up on some of the things were just said.
Sure, go ahead.
I think we know that there are the four, let's say, darlings of the establishment, of the Republican Democratic establishment, who've been hogging most of the money that's being thrown into this political campaign and almost all the press attention. And I think we see that they, like many typical candidates, say almost nothing about the issues. When they present themselves, either in emails or in any public appearance, their stump speech will spend most of its time speaking about the history of themselves, their family, their identity, and say virtually nothing about what they stand for, let alone give an argument for why their policies are superior. On the other hand, we have the news media, who are content to simply report on them, on how much money they're making, on who their endorsements are, but never really investigating their policies and never paying attention to any of the other candidates. And it's really the responsibility of a press in a democracy to not allow money to control what the citizenry knows about candidates. The press should be reporting on all of the candidates and spend time to allow the candidates to be scrutinized on their policies, on what they stand for, and to report on that. But there's been a complete absence of that. At least in my case, I certainly have not been approached by the press. And I don't know if anyone here has found themselves being called upon by the press to discuss in any detail what they stand for.
Okay, Mr. Buckley, you raised your hand. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell everybody that I have talked to some people at Georgia Public Television. They said they are going to find a way to get all of us involved in some sort of debate in the fall. Of course, it's difficult with 21 people.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, as I said, Kelly Loeffler's got her cash to spend, and it won't even, covering the whole state with all kinds of money won't even put a small dent in her pocketbook. The media is just, unfortunately, particularly the newspapers, are basically just hanging on. And so these people are basically looking for something to sell. It sounds bad, but that's just the reality of it. So, I had somebody tell me once, if you really want to get the media to cover you, go run around the park naked, and they'll cover you. You know what I mean? Now you probably won't win the race, but the reality is they're looking for something juicy, and we're all serious people with who aren't into running around the park naked or making fools of ourselves. So, in unfortunate circumstances, one thing we all have going for us is our country has major problems. It really does. And what we got to hope for is a lot of these people who typically just go out and pull the R&D lever and look for some name that they like because they knew someone when they were a kid who had that name. That people really say, hey, this is a big deal now. We've got to put someone in there who's really competent. And I'm hoping enough people will come to that realization due to the dire circumstances, and that will, inure the benefit of people like us.
Anybody else like to speak? Nobody else? Okay. Sorry. Give me a second here. I lost a...
Derek, want to say something?
Go ahead, Derek. Go ahead, Derek. Sorry, I lost my feed. Go ahead.
Sure. I'd like to know what you guys think about the latest news coming out about keeping children at home, out of school, and the impact that it is going to have. And so basically, two things came out of this, two videos that I watched. I don't recall the lady's name, but she talked about how HCQ, hydrochloroquine, was used back as early as 2005. But more importantly, she pointed out that children cannot pass the virus, and that children in Europe are already back in school. And then the other thing that she pointed out, and this is where I want to get you guys, get you gentlemen, your thoughts on it. Weeks ago, I said that keeping the children out of school is going to negatively impact blacks, especially the poor ones. And I heard today a statistic that 40% of those that have been doing distance learning don't even log in. And they said that this is going to have a major impact upon minority communities, but we know they're talking about black communities because parents just aren't going to spend the time monitoring them. And what well-to-do people have been doing, they are starting up educational pods where some are charging $80 per day per student, and they rotate from house to house into these pods to teach these children so that they still get socialized, being around other children, et cetera, et cetera. But black people can't afford it. many black people, many black people can't afford to do that. Many Hispanics can't afford to do that. And the last point that they brought out was this is about getting more money from the government and the unions or who are behind keeping our children from school. So I just want to know what you guys think.
Who would like to address that?
I'd be happy to.
Okay, Mr. Winfield, go ahead, sir.
Now, the CDC had pointed out that in a nation like ours, where in most states, now I think it's 39 to 40 states, have greatly accelerating rates of COVID infection and deaths are following, about a month behind, that it would be highly risky to open in-person schools, which would amount to something like a super spreader engine. And it has been found, from what I read recently, that although very young children do not spread the virus as much as older children, they still do spread it to some degree. And they also they also do get sick, although most are not going to get seriously sick, but some will. And there have been cases of certain kinds of diseases that have been showing up in young children, which are connected to coronavirus. But obviously, not having schools resume in person is a second best solution. And it's being done because of the danger that in-person schooling has to both the families of children, the staff of schools, and the families of schools, and the entire community. But if you're going to have any kind of online teaching in home, there are 4 challenges that have to be met. And I think Mr. Grayson was pointing to one of them, several of them in a way. First of all, we have to have broadband for everyone, because there are many people, particularly poor people of all races, who just don't have broadband or computers or anything else which would allow students to be able to study effectively at home, or for parents to have an opportunity to work remotely. So we need to, if we're going to do this, we have to ensure there's broadband for all. We also have to ensure that there's going to be daycare for those kids whose parents work, because they can't just stay at home, particularly if they're young. They have to have someone who's provided to allow them to continue their studies under some kind of supervision. It has to be safe. And if this is going to happen, there has to be testing going on. That's the only way we can really nip this thing in the bud. Students at home have to be periodically tested. All staff have to be tested. And that way they have to be identified if they're carriers. They have to be contact traced and quarantined and given paid leave and the like. And if you're going to reopen schools, I think a good example is what happened in Germany, where they had already contained the spread, where it was declining considerably. They opened schools. They had distancing by having multiple sessions. They had 2 or 3 sessions, cut classes in half. Everyone was wearing masks, and they tested all students and staff twice a week. And if they found anyone carrying it, they'd be contact traced. They'd be quarantined if necessary. And that way they were able to keep the schools running in a manageable way, because they had already clamped down on coronavirus. And we've got to do that, then we can get our schools back and running as soon as possible. But meantime, if we're going to have teaching at home, we have to provide broadband to everyone. We have to provide daycare for the parents who have to work and have no one to take care of their children. And we have to have testing carried on.
Okay, anybody else would like to comment? Any other comments? John, go ahead, John. Go ahead, John.
I concur with Mr. Grayson about the grave problems caused for poor folks who are thrown into this situation. And I want to state that the response in this country has been wholly inadequate to the scope of the solutions to coronavirus and other pandemics. We have had a failed response. Had we implemented serious solutions to slow the spread of the disease early and done proper contact tracing and funded it, and had millions of tests being processed per week early on, we would be through this. I understand Cuba has 0 cases. I understand New Zealand has cases in the less than 10 per week. I'm not suggesting that we copy all of Cuba or New Zealand's governance methods, but New Zealand is a democratic republic like us. We could have copied their response, and it would have been completely appropriate. But yeah, without millions of tests being done per week and extensive contact tracing, this is just going to continue to increase, and the poor families are going to suffer the worst unless we institute something like the Danish solution, where with a pass-through of income to people who aren't currently working for their employers, or a UBI system, so that folks can stay at home with their kids. We've flubbed this response, and it's totally ridiculous that we are in this situation like this. While I personally think President Obama should have been charged with war crimes, I think he would have done a much better response to this basic health challenge. And thank you very much.
All right, great. I would just like to comment on this a little bit myself as well. As a father of 8 children, I have children in elementary school, middle school, high school, and college. And I have a wife who is a COVID doctor. She's working as we speak in the ICU right now, dealing with COVID patients. So I'm someone who hears about the government response, and from a medical standpoint, what is good and what is not so good. And when it comes to schools, we made the choice, because we have the ability to do so, to pull our kids. And the reason why we pulled our kids is because I, number one, I have asthma. I'm also overweight, so those are 2 of the big risk factors in our family. We also have, one of my daughters has asthma as well, where that's a risk factor for her, as well as there is a chance, because we have 2 little guys who are 7 years old. Not so much that them getting COVID, but an actual I can't think what it's called, but there's 2 different diseases that you can get. They're very susceptible because of their Chinese ancestry and their age. One is the Kawasaki syndrome, and the other one is like a PP something, but I don't remember what it is. But we pulled them because of that, and we can do that because I'm a stay-at-home dad. I retired many years ago, so I have the ability to be able to supervise them. But when it comes to the rest of what's going on here, the challenges you were talking about, Mr. Winfield, I agree with a lot of that. The broadband for everyone, that's something that there should be no reason that we don't have broadband in every community, except for somebody's getting paid a lot of money to not have it here or there. Okay, I think we need broadband everywhere. That would help this country tremendously. I also think it would be good, to address Mr. Grayson's question about 40% of distance learning, they don't even log in. I would suggest that anybody that pays any kind of local property tax, that we do something that it's your property taxes and the school taxes that you pay that are part of those property taxes should come back to you in the form of a school choice, so you can actually afford, because you get that money back to help to afford to, if you want to homeschool your children or to put them into some more private type thing, type of a choice thing. And the local governments need to give some of that money back. And the schools that want to be open need to have, all the children need to have masks. I have 3 children that were going to go back to school, but the school came out and said, no, nobody will have them wear any mask until somebody's sick. No, they weren't going to social distance the people, the children, or the students. They weren't going to, have multiple sessions so they could, like you said, social distance them and keep everyone from eating at the same time. And there's ways to get around this if you're organized. But those schools that choose just to go back to same old, it's wrong and it's bad and it's going to spread the disease more and more and more. For example, one of the things not only that, but I also comment about the COVID things is that we have people who are running for office, such as Senator Loeffler and Mr. Collins, Congressman Collins, that are going out to events inside. They're not wearing masks. They're going next to people. They're basically being carriers, and they're suggesting by not social distancing inside, not wearing masks, and having everybody wear masks. They're just spreading more and more and more. I keep seeing on my Facebook pages more and more Republican people who I know are continuing to get COVID. Why? Because they're not social distancing, they're not wearing masks, and all they're doing is spreading this throughout Georgia. And we need to stop that. We need to start being responsible. When you're outside, you social distance. Okay? Try to stay away from vulnerable people. Always wear a mask. The mask is not only there to protect you, but it's also to protect other people. And I think if we had more common sense when it comes to our politicians leading by example, we'd be in a better position in this country. There, I'm off my high horse. Next. Anybody else like? Mr. Buckley, go ahead, sir.
I think I wanted to speak. I think this is really a local issue. I agree with Derek that everything I've read, in person is better than at home, and it's not working well at home. I have a 13-year-old who ordinarily does really well in school. She goes to public school. Her older sister went to private school. We get a newsletter from private school about how they've got new air conditioning systems and all this stuff that the kids will be safe coming back. Well, again, those kids are going to get ahead of these public school kids, including my daughter, who are not in Cobb County, are not going to be allowed to return to school. So for my wife, we're just going to have to do a lot of homeschooling. That's just the reality of it. And it disproportionately impacts lower income people. I'm not wealthy and I'm not poor. But my daughter, our school is highly, whites are the minority. There are a lot of blacks and a lot of Hispanics. And, my daughter's done very well in school, and it's going to hurt her. She hasn't been in school since March. And we would like for her to go back, but it's not really our call. But again, I don't think this is the federal government call. This is a local government call. Thank you.
Anybody else like to speak? All right. In the interest of,
I wanted to say just.
I'll go ahead, Mr. Grayson.
Yeah, Alan, I agree with you. It's not the federal government call. I don't think Mr. Winfield might disagree, but I know you and I agree that it's not the federal government's call. It should be a state and local government issue. So we agree. However, the federal government they're the ones doing this, okay? And parents need to push back, but they have been lulled into thinking that government knows best rather than turning to people in the local community to figure out and decide what's best for them. And I'm telling you, Mr. Winfield, I get it. The things that you want all sound great, and I wish it were so, but it's just like that song by John Lennon, Imagine. It's just not going to happen. These black kids are going to lose. At the end of the day, they are going to lose, and they are losing right now while middle class and upper class families are making ways to see to it that their children get what they need, while the other kids are going to fall to the wayside. And in 5 years, where will they be then? That's all I have to say.
Anybody else?
Just real quick.
Go
I
ahead.
have no, Cobb County said, you can't bring your kid to school, so it's not my decision. You know, a lot of people have been griping, like Gwinnett County, I saw in the news where they're all up in arms, they won't let the kids go to school, but if you're not allowed, you're not allowed.
Any other comments by any other gentleman?
I'll just say one thing, if I may.
Sure, sir.
Regarding the role of the federal government. Admittedly, we have a system where we have local control of schools, but there's a problem when we allow schools to be funded on a local basis. That's created all sorts of inequities because by having to rely on the different resources of local communities, which have different wealth, poorer communities have much fewer resources to give to their students, and that is evident right now, and it has its impact both when you're learning in school and when you're at home. But in a way, the federal government has the resources to provide the funding so that schools, for example, can ensure that all students have broadband and the equipment they need. It can ensure that everyone is tested. It can ensure that faculty and staff remain on payroll. It can ensure that there is a public system of quality, safe daycare, just like we have public schools. I mean, all of these things could be provided. I agree with Derek Grayson that they're not being provided right now. And by not being provided, poor people and their kids are going to suffer, as they are suffering most in this crisis. But we have to change that. We have to change the face of this country and nullify the blockages of opportunity that all of our tremendous inequalities in wealth and income are perpetuating.
Mr. Fortune, you want to comment, sir?
Yes, I'm fortunate that I work from home, and I have an 11-year-old daughter who's about to start at the middle school that's just a few blocks down the street from me. But they have, I think, wisely decided to not reopen the school on schedule here in Athens, Clarke County. And had they come to another conclusion, I would have kept my daughter home, even if this was a violation of the law, to protect her health and that of my family. But it's wrong that poor families are put in the position because of the inadequate social safety net and all these means testing blockages of getting resources to poor families, that they are in a situation, they're in a catch-22. America's economic system, the healthcare system, it's all an interwoven set of catch-22s where unless you're wealthy, you are between the rock and the hard place. And it's wrong. And the pandemic platform that I've worked on addresses most of the scope of the problems we're facing.
Thank you. All right, I think that in the interest of time, I think we will not have our closing statements. Next week we'll meet up, same time. I believe I'll send you an email on next week's subject. I believe you should have already received it with the I think it's the environment and the state, local, and federal jurisdictions, I believe is what it's on, off the top of my head. But I want to thank all of you for showing up. It's truly important that we work together to get a senator for the state of Georgia that will truly represent us and we, the people. And I want to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for participating in this, because it shows that you have the character to be here to actually answer questions from your fellow candidates, to get along and learn from each other. And I want to thank you very much. With that, we'll conclude this, and we will see you next week. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
It was a meaningful discussion.
Yeah.
And again, thank you. We're gone.